Yá'át'ééh, good morning, my relatives. Sorry, I forgot to bring my mic right in front of me. Sorry about that. Good morning, my relatives. It's good to be with you. Today is Tuesday, July 23rd. I'm sitting here with my second cup of coffee. I'm actually drinking a hot this morning. We've had a few cooler days, meaning in the nighttime it gets down to in the 70s, and in the daytimes it's been in the 80s. So it's been actually very nice weather here in DC these past few days. We got more rain last night, and yeah, it's been a great summer week this week. But I am sitting down with my second cup of coffee, and there's a few things that we need to talk about. Obviously, a lot going on in the 2024 election, but also there's a few new books I'm reading I wanted to discuss. So I'm glad you could join me. I want to start like I always do by acknowledging I'm speaking to you from what's called Washington, D.C. today, but these are actually the traditional lands of the Piscataway. And I want to honor the Piscataway as the hosts of the land where I'm living. I want to thank them for their stewardship of these lands. And I want to just remind myself and state how humbled I am to be moving, living, breathing, raising my family here on these lands today. So, my Piscataway relatives, thank you for your stewardship of these lands. So, unless you've been living in a cave for the past 72 hours, you know there is a lot that's happened in the 2024 presidential election. On Sunday afternoon, President Biden dropped out of the race after weeks of pressure from the Democratic Party due to his incredibly poor performance in the presidential debate with Donald Trump in June of this year. And that, of course, that tweet where he announced he was dropping out was almost immediately followed by another tweet stating that he was fully endorsing Kamala Harris as the nominee for president in this election. And so there's a lot we want to talk about in this. I've done some shows already on President Biden and on his campaign, and I have stated that both Donald Trump and Joe Biden needed or should be dropping out of this race because neither one of them are fit to serve. And I actually was not expecting either of them to listen, but Joe Biden finally relented to the pressure, and he was receiving a lot of pressure by the Democratic Party to drop out of the race, and he did that. So I want to actually talk a little bit about that first. But before I begin, let me see who's on with me. Dalian, Yá'át'ééh, Abinah, thanks for joining. It's good to see you here. Susan, Yá'át'ééh, Abinah, thanks for joining me with your delicious hot tea. Mr. Phil Fox, thanks for being here. It's great to have you here. And George, Yá'át'ééh, Abinah, thanks for joining me today. It's great to have all of you and many more who are online with me. I hope your favorite morning beverage is as good as mine is. So the first article I want to share with you is from Politico, and I read this early yesterday, or maybe it was, or even on Sunday when I read this, I forget exactly. But it's titled, Why Biden Finally Quit. And it really goes in, because if you remember listening to the rhetoric of the campaign and even to Biden himself, Steve, Yá'át'ééh, Abinah, I just saw you join. Thanks for being here, Steve. It's good to have you on this morning. But so up until literally Saturday, the campaign was stating that Biden was not going to drop out. He was determined to stay in the race. He felt very strongly he was the only candidate who could beat Donald Trump. And this has been the mantra ever since the kind of roar started growing out of his very poor debate performance a few weeks ago. And then there was it seemed like a sudden turn. And this article goes into why he finally decided to drop out. And part of it was parts of his inner circle began to really acknowledge that there was not a path towards victory. I've read places that President Biden or President Obama had a conversation with him. Nancy Pelosi said some things hinting at that. Chuck Schumer and other really respected voices within the Democratic Party came to him and said. But one of the things that kind of put the icing on the cake was when his own campaign and his own inner circle came to him with some poll numbers where apparently they had done some polling in some specific states where they needed to do well, and they did not see a path towards victory for him. And it was the polling data, as well as the encouragement from those around him, or the acknowledgement of those in his tight circle around him, saying, "Yeah, I don't think we can do this," that finally, I think, compelled him to drop out. Now, immediately, so his first post where he dropped out did not say anything about endorsing Vice President Harris or anyone else for the office. It just was that he was dropping out. But that was followed up shortly thereafter with a tweet on X. I don't even know what you call it on X. It's an X on X. It's a tweet on X where he basically said that he was fully endorsing Vice President Harris in the 2024 campaign. And since he has even stated that he's going to continue to campaign just as hard for her to make sure that she wins this election. So since then, there have been a lot of posts on social media and op-eds and interviews by members of his staff, by other Democratic leaders. There was a very long post by President Obama yesterday, basically praising Joe Biden for dropping out, for passing the torch on to a younger generation, for doing all the things that he did. And I'm going to talk about that more at the end of this campaign, or at the end of this show, because I want to actually get into that. Like, what was he really doing the noble thing here by dropping out? Or was this more of a strategic decision that he and his campaign staff made? I want to talk more about that a little bit later. But with his immediate endorsement of Kamala Harris, she immediately became the front runner in the Democratic Party to become the nominee. And yesterday, there was a survey taken by AP that showed she had more than half of the delegates that were needed. And this morning, I found another survey taken that shows she's basically secured all the delegates she needs to become the nominee. And so obviously, because all of the delegates had previously, or most of the delegates had been previously committed to the Biden campaign with Joe Biden as the top of the ticket, they would have to choose to vote otherwise at the convention. And apparently there's been enough of a swing and a commitment by the delegates going to the convention that there's enough support now to nominate Vice President Harris as the Democratic nominee. So that news came out both yesterday and today. And then some other articles began coming out. There was this article in the New York Times, and there were other articles I'm going to share a little bit later. But Harris raised $81 million in her first 24 hours. So from Sunday afternoon to Monday afternoon, her first 24 hours as the nominee, or as a candidate for president, she raised $81 million, which is a historic amount. And since that, she has continued to raise even more money. In fact, in a CBS article this morning that looked at not only her first 24 hours as a candidate, but also at the first day, basically Sunday and all day Monday, going through Monday night, it showed that she had raised $100 million from Sunday afternoon through Monday night in her campaign, which was just yesterday, right? And so obviously there was a lot of support flooding in. Many of those supporters were small-time donors and even first-time donors in this campaign who were saying they wanted to stand behind Vice President Harris in her bid to become president. And so with it being fairly clear that Kamala Harris is going to become the nominee at the convention, and with her fundraising in very good shape, a lot of the debate has been going on, and no one has really stepped up to challenge that I've seen to challenge her in for the nomination in the Democratic Party. And so now there's a massive debate going on about who's going to be her vice presidential candidate. And this is an article that there were several articles. New York Times ran one, Washington Post ran one, LA Times ran one. There's a lot of people who said that she was there were a lot of options, some governors, some other people. And I liked this New York Times list because, and I forgot to get the names off the list. Let me pull it up really quick and I'll show you the names that are on this list. So in the LA Times list that I just posted, the people they listed was North Carolina Governor Ray Cooper. They also listed Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro. They also listed Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, and they listed Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear. And then at the end of the article, not even pictured at the top, they also listed Georgia Senator Raphael Warnock as a potential one, and Arizona Senator Mark Kelly as a potential vice presidential candidate. And then at the very bottom, their last option that they listed in this article was Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. And you've heard me say, if you listen to my Second Cup of Coffee regularly, that I would love to have seen a debate between Pete and Donald Trump. I have seen several interviews with Pete, whether it's on Fox News or in questioning by Congress as he's serving as the Secretary of Transportation, where he gives some incredibly sharp and even very witty answers. I have just been very impressed at the way that he conducts himself and the way he holds himself and the way that he stays on message and is clear about his reasoning and why he's doing things. And I would have actually liked it to seen if there had been a wide open campaign at the beginning, if Joe Biden would have decided to drop out before the election even began, as he said he was going to do when he ran in 2020, and say that he was going to be a transitional candidate and pass the torch on in the next election. I would have loved to see Pete in the primary, going for this spot. Now I actually really like him as a potential vice presidential candidate. I think he would be a very strong candidate to serve as President Harris's vice presidential candidate in this campaign. And I would be actually very excited to see that. It seems like he's kind of at the bottom of the list. I've read some other lists. It doesn't seem like he's mentioned in all the lists I've seen out there. But I think he is absolutely one of the most intriguing possibilities for a vice presidential candidate in this race. And so, yeah, it'd be interesting to see. But I've watched several interviews with him where, whether it's on Fox News, where they're trying to corner him, or whether it's in debates in Congress, where they're trying to get him to trip up on things, he is just really, really good at staying on message, knowing his facts, and bringing it back to the point of the entire session anyway. And so I've been very impressed with him. So I'm going to be very interesting to see what's going to be happening in these next few weeks. Obviously, you've seen articles about this out there, but I, for the first time, am really interested in this campaign. I think there is a chance for Vice President, or for Kamala Harris, to really kind of distinguish herself as a candidate. I hope she does not just take on all of the policies and the entire moderate position that Joe Biden took on everything. I hope she really does clearly distinguish her voice and her policies and her platform, and show that she is definitely her own person and is going to put her own spin on this campaign, and not just run on the exact same thing that Joe Biden ran on with all of the issues out there. So I'm going to be watching very closely in these next few weeks to see and to listen to her speeches and what her campaign says and what she says during her events. But I am really interested, right? When it was just two late 70, early 80 white landowning men from the upper echelons of the 1%, this election was, to be honest, very boring, right? You knew what they were going to say. Even what the debate, which we thought was going to be at least somewhat telling, was one of the most difficult debates I've ever watched. It was Trump, who doesn't have very much intellectual curiosity and is not that good at just articulating himself. And then, of course, Joe Biden was not very articulate in that debate at all. And so I'm really excited to see what kind of energy and debate our Vice President Harris brings into this campaign. And I need to fix my camera to make sure that I don't lose power there. Anyway, so those are a few of the things that I'm going to be watching for in this next few weeks. But I really think, I for one will be paying a lot more attention and even closer attention to what's being said, because I think that Vice President Harris has a real possibility of challenging Donald Trump on some issues and really forcing him to actually campaign for the very first time, right? He hasn't really had to campaign this entire election. He did not campaign at all. I mean, he went out and spoke, but he rambled. That's all he does. He goes off and he rambles, and he doesn't really talk to the American people. He talks to the people who love him. And I think with this change, that Donald Trump is going to have to talk to a much more national audience. He's going to have to be really much more articulate about his policies. And I don't think he's going to be able to attack Vice President Harris the same way that he was able to attack Joe Biden. And so I'm very interested. I'm also very interested in the debates now. I think it'll be fascinating to see the debates that happen and how they come together. And of course, depending on who gets selected as the vice presidential candidate, I'm really excited to see that debate as well. I haven't said much about J.D. Vance yet, but we will talk about him at some point. Now, the thing I want to talk a little bit about, and the discussion I really want to have, or what I want to point out, and I'll go back to the fundraising. There was an AP article that I saw yesterday. This was the first article I saw. It was a short little blurb on AP about the amount of money that the Harris campaign raised in the first 24 hours after Joe Biden dropped out. And it was just a little bit it was just a little kind of like an AP news update, right? It was a really small story. But I want to read to you two things towards the end of that story, what it said. It said, the massive fundraising haul represents the largest 24-hour fundraising sum by either party in the 2024 presidential campaign. It said Trump reported raising more than $50 million in the 24-hour period after his felony conviction in the New York hush money trial, and Joe Biden reported $38 million fundraised in the 4 days after his disastrous debate performance. And I mean, that caught my eye, right? Because again, you've heard me say this before, it shows how absolutely low the bar is for white landowning men seeking power. Donald Trump raised the most amount of money he's raised in this campaign by getting convicted of a felony, right? That's what did it. Joe Biden had a disastrous debate performance, and that's what led to his highest fundraising total. Kamala Harris is stepping onto the stage to do something that has never been done in the history of this nation, which is to become not only the first woman, but the first woman of color to serve as president of the United States. And I'm glad her 24-hour total was higher than both Donald Trump and Joe Biden's. But again, it just shows how absolutely low the bar is for white landowning men seeking power. If you're a Republican, you just got to get convicted of a felony. Right? If you're a white landowning male in the Democratic Party, you just have to have a disastrous debate performance, and that will bring in tons of money to support your campaign. I really hope that the support for Harris continues to grow in this, and I would love to see just some unprecedented things begin happening in this campaign, because she is doing something that is, again, she's trying to become the first woman ever, and the first woman of color ever to serve as president of the United States. Other women have campaigned for it, but again, that glass ceiling has not been broken yet. And so I'm really excited to see what's going to happen in these next few weeks. The other thing I wanted to talk about is there's another AP story that I'm going to share this right now, and the title of it today is "Biden was all in until the day he got out: How a Campaign Unraveled." And this was a story in AP, and it talked about kind of the last 24 hours or so, the last actually few weeks leading up to him announcing he was announcing the end of his campaign. But the previous headline for this story really caught my eye, and the previous headline was "Biden passed the torch slowly, hanging on until the wheels finally came off." And I actually think that's a much more accurate article, because I've watched many of the interviews with Joe Biden after the disastrous debate performance. And it's been interesting because right now a lot of people are praising Joe Biden for passing the torch and saying this is going to put him down in history as one of the great presidents in our nation's history because of his ability to pass the torch. And I absolutely think he did the right thing. And I'm glad that he dropped out of the race and passed the torch on to Vice President Harris. I'm very grateful he did both of those things. But we have to remember, he didn't do these things willingly. I mean, after that disastrous debate performance where the entire globe saw that he was not capable of holding his own against Donald Trump, he came back in that interview with George Stephanopoulos, adamant that it was just a bad night and he was going to continue campaigning. He started using Donald Trump's own arguments. Look at how big my crowds are. Who else can draw a crowd as big as I am? No one else can beat Donald Trump except me. I am the only one. When he was even asked directly why he didn't pass the torch at the beginning of this campaign like he promised he would in 2020, why was it only now coming up? And he was denying he was going to do it. And he said, because the situation changed. And I realize I'm the only one who can beat Donald Trump. It wasn't until he got the polling numbers that showed he was going to lose this election that he finally conceded to the mood of his party and passing the torch on to Vice President Harris. Again, I'm glad he did it. It was absolutely the right decision. But he did not do this willingly. And he was adamant up until the very end that he was the only person who could beat Donald Trump. And so I want to give him credit, but I don't want to give him too much credit. Because, again, he was holding on to power literally until the wheels fell off his campaign. And only then, when he realized there was no way he could win, did he pass the torch. Even when he stated in 2020 that he was going to be a transition candidate and was going to pass the torch off to a younger generation. And then when this campaign season came around, he decided not to do that. It reminds me a lot about when Jerry Seinfeld decided to end the Seinfeld show. And he ended the show when the show was at the top of the ratings. And he had a massive contract from NBC to that they were offering him to do another season of the show. And he said, no, the thing about being a comedian is timing. You got to know when to quit. And he quit when his show was at the height of its ratings. I think had Joe Biden passed the torch at the beginning of this campaign, instead of only after the wheels fell off more than halfway through, then, yes, this is a great man who is thinking only about the good of his country. But when he had to wait until it was statistically demonstrated and proven to him that he was not going to win, and only then did he, and I will say begrudgingly, pass the torch. We can't give him too much credit. I give him credit. He's done a whole lot more than Trump's done. Trump also should have passed the torch. He shouldn't have been running in this campaign. But I don't want to give him too much credit. I think that's dangerous because it just lowers the bar. It makes him the story. Again, the bar for white landowning men seeking power is incredibly low. All Donald Trump had to do was get convicted of a felony. All Joe Biden had to do was have a disastrous debate performance. Those were their highest fundraising days. And now Joe Biden is getting praised for dropping out of an election. It was statistically proven and globally demonstrated he was not going to win. And he didn't do it immediately. If he would have come out of the debate and say, yeah, I don't have it. No, he came back adamant. I'm the only one who can beat Trump. Look at my crowds. Look at everything else. No one else can do this. I'm the only one who can do this. He said that over and over and over and over again. So give him credit, more than Donald Trump. But let's not give him too much credit, because he did not do this willingly. He only did it when it was clearly demonstrated he wasn't going to win. So those are a few of my thoughts. I'm going to continue watching this campaign with renewed interest. I'm actually really excited to see what's going to happen. I'm excited to see the debates that are going to take place, and I really hope this generates some positive, productive conversation in our country. And I really hope that the Harris campaign comes out with a very distinct voice and clear policies of what they intend to do and how they intend to govern. And I would love to. I'm looking forward to hearing this. But I'm expecting, and I expect that they will, the campaign. I expect that Vice President Harris will campaign hard and will work to speak to the American people. So anyway, I'm excited to see what's going to happen with my relatives. Now, I want to talk briefly about a few books that I've been reading. And as you know, I've been reading a lot of books lately on health, on movement, on exercise. I've been doing some barefoot running. I've been doing a lot of things. And there's about a year ago, it was actually in almost more than a year. No, it was about a year ago. It was a year and a half ago. It was early 2023. I knew I needed to get more sleep. I had been operating on 5 to maybe 5.5 hours of sleep a night, sometimes less than 5. I was waking up many mornings early to watch the sunrise. I was staying up late at night because I'm an extrovert and I was going to bed after my kids were going to bed. And so I was literally, I've been doing this most of my adult life, living on 5.5 to or less hours of sleep at night. And I knew I needed to get more, especially as I was getting older. And so I began working hard in early 2023 to get to bed earlier. And I improved my average. I began getting closer to 6 hours of sleep a night, staying in bed for almost 6.5 hours. Obviously, you wake up throughout the night and you have a little bit of, if you ever track your sleep on your watch, you wake up frequently throughout the night. And so I was trying to get 6 actual hours of sleep, or more than 5.5 hours of sleep every night. But I wasn't reading a lot I was reading a few articles, but I wasn't doing any in-depth research on sleep. And I decided this past week to really do some more in-depth reading on sleep and on the need for sleep. And I'm looking at two books right now. One that I started reading yesterday, and another one that I'm reading. I'm listening to podcasts by the author, and his book is I'm going to read next. But the first book I started reading yesterday is called Why We Sleep, and it's by Matthew Walker. He's a PhD, and it goes in not just giving tips on how to sleep better and what to do to maximize sleep, but it goes into why our bodies need to sleep and what happens to our bodies and our brains when we sleep, and how this is across all of the spectrum of nature, and all animals and mammals, and everyone needs sleep. And so how does sleep work? What does it do? And it's just a really good book. It has very high ratings. It's been read by a lot of people, and I've started reading it yesterday, and it's really opening my eyes to a lot of our need for sleep, and what we need to do to get better sleep. The other book that I've been listening to podcasts by this author is by Sean Stevenson, and this book is called Sleep Smarter: 21 Essential. I need to plug in my laptop. Sorry, I knew something was telling me to do something. This book is by Sean Stevenson, and it's 21 Essential Strategies to Sleep Your Way to a Better Body, Better Health, and Bigger Success. And I listened to a podcast by Sean Stevenson before I read the book. And actually, he was podcasting before he wrote this book. And if you go back into his podcasts, he's been running his podcast for a number of years. Episodes 4, 5, and 6 of his podcast, right after he started it, are titled Help Me Sleep: 21 Ways to Cure Your Sleep Problems. And he actually gives his tips on sleeping in this podcast. I'm going to put the first episode of this 3-part series. He does it in 3 separate podcasts: part 1, 2, and 3, episodes 4, 5, and 6. This is episode 4, the first one, and then I'll put the other 2 episodes in here as well. This next one is episode 5, and it's part 2 of the series, and then the last one is episode 6, which is part 3 of the series. And I'm assuming these are the same 21 things he talks about in his book. I haven't read the book yet, but for me, the second episode, episode 5, the middle one I put up there, was a really good episode about why we need to sleep and what we need to do to sleep better. And he gives a lot of really good tips, from having a dark room to kind of shutting things down at night, how to eat healthier to enhance your sleep in a lot of ways. And so I've actually found that book. The other book is a much more longer kind of primer just on sleep and the need for it, and it kind of touches on a lot of aspects of it. This one seems to be more about how to sleep better, how to sleep smarter, and it has some very practical tips in it. And so I'm working through both of those right now. The other book that I started reading, and this one I'm going to give to you with a bit of trepidation, because this book, I'll show you the title, the cover here, is called Ultra Processed People. And it's by Chris Van Tulleken, Tulleken. And it's about the food industry and ultra-processed foods. I'm going to just put the title of the book and the author in the chat here. I don't have a link for it, but if you Google it, you can find it. I'm listening to this book on Audible. I started this book yesterday. And already it's causing me to rethink what I'm eating. I'm barely in like the second chapter. And already I'm rethinking what I eat. If you remember, I've said this a few times over the past year. I've lost about 35 pounds. I've been very clear about, we're very intentional about watching the foods I eat. I haven't gone on a diet per se. I've just been cooking more at home, cooking healthier foods, cooking more whole foods, eating out less and buying processed and ready-made meals less often, and working more on doing home-cooked meals here at the house, and then watching the portions that I eat. So I've been working hard not to be on a diet. So over the past year, again with my walking and my movement and everything else, I've lost about 35 pounds. But also over the past year, I one of my pleasures is I love a good bowl of ice, a good cone of ice cream cone, and many nights a week. I'll have a small single serving ice cream cone with a single small scoop on top of it of Dutch chocolate. And it's my favorite ice cream. There's a brand I buy every week at the grocery store, and right, it's one of I eat very little sugar throughout the day. I drink no sodas. I drink coffee without sugar, and I drink water. I eat very few snacks or sweets or other snack on things during the day, and so my small cone of ice cream every night has been one of my quote unquote guilty pleasures that I've really enjoyed. And I've been thrilled that I've been able to lose 35 pounds while still eating my ice cream cone every night. And believe it or not, his first chapter of the book was about the processing that goes into how ice cream is made. Oh, it pained me to hear and to see about what is put into what we call ice cream and how that is processed, ultra processed, and the things we're putting into our body because of the ice cream that we eat. And it's literally after one night, I'm rethinking my tradition of eating a nightly small ice cream cone. And I may, if I even keep eating them, I'll maybe eat them maybe once a week. I'm not sure. And I think one of the things that this book is opening my eyes to is kind of the standard definition or the baseline definition of an ultra processed food is if it comes in a plastic wrapping, if it's pre-made, and it has at least one ingredient in the food that you would not find in a normal kitchen, that is ultra processed. Now, obviously, the food industry is protesting this and say that's much too broad of a definition, and it blah blah blah. But if you just go to, and so it talks a lot about like dessert things and granola bars and breakfast cereals and of course snacks and sweets that we eat and processed food, prepackaged food that we buy. And again, if you just go through the items, the ingredients of the most basic items you may have in your kitchen. Like last night, I looked at our bottle of mayonnaise we bought, and it's mayonnaise made with real eggs and real, right? It's made with real ingredient. And I looked at the ingredients of it, and the first ingredient on the list was soybean oil. Like the third or fourth item on the list was eggs. And I looked at the ingredient list of the ice cream, right? And there's things you can't even pronounce in going into the ice cream. And so he really looked at how basically what the food industry is doing to us is it's training us to eat foods that are not actually the foods we think we're eating, right? When we think we're eating ice cream, we think we're eating frozen cream with some kind of flavoring in it. And we are eating that to some quantity, but the majority of the ingredients in that is not cream, nor is it chocolate. It's other things made to less expensively make the product taste creamier and taste chocolatier or richer or sweeter without actually using the expense of real cream and real chocolate. And so it's tricking our bodies and our mouths and our tongues and our palates into thinking we're eating something when we're actually eating something very different. And so again, I've only read 2 chapters into this book, Ultra Processed People, and it's already causing me to rethink. Right, I remember looking at the ingredients for. I like to make a breakfast sandwich once or twice a week in the morning on an English muffin. I'll buy a package of English muffins in the store, and I looked at the ingredients in my English muffin, and yeah, there's a lot of things in that ingredient list I can't pronounce. And this is just a basic. You would think flour, right? Water, salt, maybe a little bit of sugar, but no, there's all these are that I can't even pronounce that are on that list. And so I'm only beginning the book, but it's already beginning to kind of expose me to things that I knew were there, but I didn't necessarily want to be exposed to. But now I'm exposing myself to these things, and I'm learning about these things. And already it's chapter 2, I'm already rethinking some of the stuff I'm eating and how we prepare foods and how we shop and so on and so forth. At some point, I'll probably do a whole show on this book, just about what I learned from it, as well as how it's affected or made me change what I eat, and how I cook and prepare foods differently. But already it's having a huge impact. I'm only on chapter 2. So anyway, those are a few things I would recommend. So if you want to, and right now I'm just starting these books, so I can't fully recommend them. But what I've read so far, what I'm learning so far, is definitely very interesting, and I'm finding it makes sense to me. And so I'm thinking about what do I need to do to incorporate some of these into my healthier life patterns. But yeah, so if you're able to, I encourage you to grab those books too. I will be talking about them more in the future, as I continue to look both at how to live healthier and how to kind of decolonize our health, or decolonize our diet, and so on and so forth, and thinking about these things at a very kind of practical daily level. Anyway, my relatives, I hope these things you find helpful and interesting. I'm grateful that you could join me today. If you would like to support my work and help keep my voice independent, I invite you to join my Patreon. I do not monetize my social media on Facebook or on YouTube. They show commercials on my YouTube videos, but I don't monetize them, so I don't get paid from that, because I don't want to give advertisers any influence over what I say. And so I do have my Patreon channel where you get ad-free versions of my Second Cups of Coffee and other things I put on my YouTube channel, as well as deeper conversations. Next week, this coming Sunday, I think it's on July 28th, I'm having my monthly Q&A. I'm doing posts regularly each month about the book I'm writing, Decolonizing Faith, and other stuff I'm working on. And so if you would like to go deeper in these conversations, you can do that. I even have a tier on my Patreon called, it's kind of a consulting tier, where if someone needs to do some consulting on something or wants to go dive deeper into a topic, just one-on-one with me, if you sign up for the consulting tier, I give you a 45 to 60 minute kind of discussion consultation with me about the topic that you want to discuss regarding the work that I'm trying to do. So there's a lot of ways to engage with me more deeply, and you can sign up even just for 1 month. And whenever you sign up for a month of one of the tiers, you get access to not only the content for that month, but all of the content. And I've been on Patreon for 3 years now, so there's 3 years worth of content on my Patreon that you get access to. So even if you want to jump on and just binge things for a month, there's a lot of content on there. So anyway, I invite you to think about joining my Patreon. It's a great way to take the conversation deeper. And then, of course, you can also continue to buy copies of my book, Unsettling Truths, The Ongoing Dehumanizing Legacy of the Doctrine of Discovery, that I co-author with my good friend Soong-Chan Rah. And you can download my podcast, which is what you're listening to right now. You can get the podcast directly on Spotify, or you can also get it from Apple and other of the major podcast sites. Anywhere you get your podcasts, I think my podcast is posted there. It's just called My Second Cup of Coffee, and you can download it from there. But yeah, it's a great way to kind of take My Second Cup of Coffee to go and listen to it in your earbuds when you're out jogging or walking or traveling or whatever else you're doing. So my relatives, I appreciate you. Thank you for joining me this morning for my second cup of coffee. I hope your day and your coffee is as good as mine is. Walk in beauty, my relatives. May we all learn how to walk in beauty together. Yá'át'ééh and hakone.